The crystalline towers of Velter Prime reached toward the purple sky like frozen lightning. Inside the largest tower, the royal palace stood as a monument to the Valkyrie Empire's power. The Valkyrie were a proud species, reptilian in appearance with scales that shimmered like polished metal. They had conquered 3 solar systems and considered themselves the greatest military force in their region of space. Queen Myrae sat on her throne, reviewing reports from the outer colonies. She was young for a Valkyrie monarch, barely into her 3rd decade, but her golden eyes held wisdom beyond her years. Her scales were a rare silver color, marking her as royalty. Around her stood her personal guards, the finest warriors the Valkyrie could produce. At the edge of the formation stood someone who looked very different from the others. Sergeant Daiho was human, and he stuck out among the tall Valkyrie guards like a single dark stone among diamonds. He wore the standard armor provided by the palace, but underneath he kept his Korean Unified Forces uniform close to his heart. He had been on Velter Prime for 3 months now, part of a diplomatic exchange between Earth and the Valkyrie Empire. Captain Tavrek, the head of the Queen's Guard, walked past Daiho without acknowledgement. The Valkyrie captain stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, his red scales gleaming under the palace lights. He had made his opinion of the human guard very clear from the beginning. Humans were primitives, their technology centuries behind Valkyrie standards. They had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, while the Valkyrie had been crossing the stars for millennia. The human is here as a courtesy, Tavrek had told his guards on Daiho's first day. Nothing more. Do not expect him to understand our protocols or match our standards. Daiho had said nothing in response. He had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. He observed everything, learned the palace layout, memorized the guard rotations, and kept his opinions to himself. The other guards largely ignored him, which suited him fine. Queen Myrae, however, was different. She often spoke with Daiho during quiet moments, asking questions about Earth and human culture. She seemed genuinely curious about his species. "Your people fought a war that lasted 6 years across your entire planet," she said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. Her guards maintained their distance, giving the queen privacy but staying alert. "Your historians call it the Third World War. You lost billions of people." "Yes, Your Majesty," Daiho replied simply. "And yet you kept fighting. Even when your cities burned, even when defeat seemed certain, humans refused to surrender." She tilted her head, studying him. "Why?" Daiho thought about the question. "We don't know how to quit, I suppose. It's not in our nature. When things get bad, we dig in deeper." "The Valkyrie would call that inefficient," Myrae said, but there was no mockery in her voice. "We calculate odds. We make strategic withdrawals when necessary. Your approach seems ... reckless." "Maybe it is," Daiho agreed. "But we're still here." The queen had smiled at that, a gesture that showed her sharp teeth, but somehow seemed warm rather than threatening. The palace itself was a marvel of engineering. Walls made of transparent crystal allowed natural light to flood every corridor. Energy shields hummed quietly, invisible but constantly active. Security systems monitored every entrance, every window, every possible point of intrusion. The Valkyrie had perfected defensive architecture over thousands of years. Daiho spent his off-duty hours exploring the areas he was permitted to access. He noted the emergency exits, the backup power generators, the armory locations. Old habits from his military training died hard. His superiors back on Earth had chosen him for this assignment because of his record. He had served in 3 conflict zones, earned 2 medals for valor, and never abandoned his post even when ordered to retreat. "You have that look humans get," Lieutenant Gora said one day. She was the youngest of the royal guards, her scales still bright green with youth. Unlike the others, She sometimes spoke with Deho, like you are always planning for a fight. Just staying alert, Deho said. Captain Tavrik says humans are paranoid. He says you see threats everywhere because your species evolved as prey animals. Deho smiled slightly. We were both predator and prey. It made us cautious. The Velkari evolved as apex predators, Bora said with pride. We have never been prey to anything. Deho didn't respond to that. He had read the classified files that the human diplomatic corps had gathered on the Velkari. There were gaps in their history, periods where their civilization had nearly collapsed for reasons their modern historians didn't discuss. But he kept that knowledge to himself. The days followed a routine. Morning inspections, afternoon patrols, evening briefings. Deho stood his watches, maintained his equipment, and waited. For what? He wasn't entirely sure. But his instincts told him that this assignment wouldn't stay quiet forever. Minister Jiwu, the Queen's chief advisor, regarded Deho with barely concealed disdain. The elderly Valkyrie's scales had faded to a dull gray, and he walked with a cane carved from alien wood. Your Majesty, I must again protest the presence of this human in your personal guard. It sends the wrong message to our people. We appear weak, as if we need help from primitives. The human stays, Myray said firmly. We agreed to this exchange. Besides, Sergeant Deho has proven himself competent. Competent at standing still? Jiwu muttered. Any fool can do that. Deho remained at attention, his face showing nothing. He had endured worse insults during his military career. That evening, as the twin moons rose over Velter Prime, Deho stood watch outside the Queen's private chambers. The palace was quiet, the only sounds the soft hum of technology and the distant flow of the artificial waterfalls in the gardens. Captain Tavrik approached, his taloned feet clicking on the crystal floor. Human, Tavrik said, not bothering with Deho's rank or name. Tomorrow the Queen travels to the northern province. You will remain here. We have enough guards for the journey. I go where the Queen goes, Deho replied calmly. Those are my orders from both our governments. Tavrik's scales rippled with irritation. Your orders mean nothing here. This is Valkari territory. You follow my commands. With respect, Captain, I answer to Queen Myray. If she orders me to stay, I'll stay. Until then, I go where she goes. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Tavrik snorted and walked away. Stubborn primitive, he muttered. Deho allowed himself a small smile once the captain was gone. Stubbornness was a very human trait, and he wore it with pride. The night passed without incident. The palace slept, secure in its power and its technology. None of them knew that far away, in the darkness between stars, something ancient had awakened. Something that had once nearly destroyed the Valkari species was moving again, drawn by the light of their civilization, like a moth to flame. But that knowledge would come soon enough. The morning started like any other. Deho performed his exercises in the small quarters assigned to him, then checked his equipment. His plasma rifle was a Valkari design, efficient but unfamiliar compared to the weapons he had trained with on Earth. He preferred the solid weight of human firearms. But he had learned to adapt. The breakfast hall buzzed with unusual energy. Guards spoke in hushed voices, their scales rippling with colors that Deho had learned indicated anxiety. He collected his meal and sat alone, as always, but he listened carefully. 3 colonies have gone dark, one guard was saying. No distress signals, no explanations. Just silence. Probably equipment failures, another responded. The outer colonies always have technical problems. All 3 at once? That seems unlikely. Deho filed the information away. His human diplomatic handlers had taught him to pay attention to patterns. 3 colonies going silent simultaneously wasn't a coincidence. Queen Myray summoned her full council that afternoon. Daiho stood at his post outside the council chamber, but the doors were thin enough to hear raised voices inside. Minister Jiwoo's reedy tone cut through the others. We cannot panic over every technical glitch. The Empire has thousands of colonies and outposts. Some communication delays are normal. This is different. That was the Queen's voice, firm and commanding. I received a personal message from Governor Haijin before her colony went silent. She was afraid. Haijin is your cousin, Your Majesty, but she is also known for being ... dramatic. Play the message again. There was silence, and a crackling audio file filled the chamber. A female Velkari voice, tight with fear. Your Majesty, something is wrong. The miners found structures in the deep tunnels, old structures. When they opened them, something came out. Our guards they're not responding properly. They just stand there frozen. We're trying to evacuate, but static filled the line. Then the voice returned, now panicked and barely coherent. They've returned? The hunters are back. Tell the High Command. Tell everyone. Avoid hunt. The message cut off abruptly. Ahau felt the temperature in the corridor drop despite the climate controls. He heard movement in the chamber, the sound of chairs scraping as council members shifted uncomfortably. What are the Void Hunters? That was Captain Tavrek's voice, and Dehao was surprised to hear uncertainty in it. Minister Jiwoo spoke, and now his tone had changed completely. Ancient history, legends, they cannot have returned. Explain, the Queen commanded. 3,000 years ago, before the Valkyrie Empire rose to its current glory, our species faced extinction. Creatures from the void between stars hunted us across multiple worlds. They were... Jiwoo paused. They were perfect predators. They could phase through solid matter. They were nearly impossible to kill. And they possessed a weapon that rendered our warriors helpless. What weapon? Fear, Your Majesty. Pure primal terror. They emit some form of psychic pulse that triggers every survival instinct in Valkyrie biology. Our ancestors described it as looking death in the face and knowing, with absolute certainty, that you were about to be consumed. Even our greatest warriors became paralyzed in their presence. The chamber was silent for several heartbeats. How did our ancestors defeat them? Myray asked. They didn't, Jiwoo said quietly. The hunters simply ... left. They disappeared back into the void. Our historians theorized that they had depleted our population enough that we were no longer worth hunting. We rebuilt, expanded, and ensured that no record of our ... weakness ... spread beyond our own species. Daiho processed this information. A species-wide vulnerability to psychic attack. That explained some of the gaps in Valkyrie history. It also explained why they had never mentioned it to humanity during the diplomatic negotiations. The council continued debating for hours. Captain Tavrek ordered increased security protocols around the palace. Long-range sensors were directed toward the outer colonies, searching for any sign of the threat. The palace guards drilled with renewed intensity, though Daiho noticed they seemed more nervous than focused. He spent the evening in the palace library, accessing the human diplomatic database. His clearance level gave him access to files that most humans never saw. He searched for references to Valkyrie history, ancient threats, and unexplained phenomena. The information was fragmentary, but it painted a disturbing picture. The Void Hunters were described in old Valkyrie texts as the Devourers, the shadow that feeds, and the end of pride. They appeared without warning, destroyed advanced civilizations, and vanished just as mysteriously. The Valkyrie weren't their only victims. At least 4 other species had encountered them over the past 10,000 years. None had survived to become spacefaring civilizations again. Lieutenant Bora found him in the library near midnight. The human actually reads, she said, surprised. I thought you spent your free time maintaining weapons. I like to know what I'm facing, Daho replied. Aura's scales shifted to a darker green. Do you think they're real? The hunters? Your cousin wouldn't panic over nothing. Neither would 3 entire colonies go silent without cause. Captain Tavrik says our modern weapons will be more than sufficient if these creatures do appear. We have plasma cannons, energy shields, orbital defense platforms. We're not the primitive Valkyrie of 3,000 years ago. Daho closed the datapad. Technology doesn't mean much if the people using it are too scared to function. Valkyrie warriors don't freeze in fear, Aura said, but her voice lacked conviction. Let's hope you're right. Over the next 3 days, the situation deteriorated. 2 more colonies went silent. Long-range sensors detected debris fields where thriving settlements had been. Scout ships sent to investigate never returned. The Valkyrie High Command issued statements assuring the public that everything was under control, but panic spread through the Empire anyway. Queen Myrae addressed her guard personally. I will not flee my palace like a frightened child. We will maintain our duties and our dignity. If these hunters do come to Velter Prime, they will find us ready. Captain Tavrik saluted sharply, but Daho saw the tremor in the Valkyrie's clawed hand. The others tried to hide their fear, but their scales betrayed them, shifting through colors that indicated stress and anxiety. Dahi checked his rifle for the 100th time. He had requisitioned additional ammunition and several human-made grenades from the diplomatic supply cache. The Valkyrie quartermasters had looked at him strangely, but they hadn't refused. On the 5th day, the palace sensors detected an anomaly approaching. Velter Prime. Something massive was moving through space at impossible speeds. It wasn't using conventional propulsion. It seemed to bend space itself, sliding through the fabric of reality like a knife through silk. The orbital defense platforms powered up. Fighter squadrons scrambled. Ground-based cannons swiveled toward the sky. The entire planet went to full military alert. Daho stood at his post outside the Queen's chambers, watching the other guards. Their scales rippled constantly now, showing fear they could no longer hide. Captain Tavrik barked orders, his voice harsh and commanding, but Daho heard the edge of panic underneath. The anomaly entered orbit. Sensors couldn't get a clear reading. It was both there and not there, phasing in and out of normal space. Then, without warning, it was simply there. A ship, if it could be called that. It looked organic, like a massive creature that had died and been hollowed out. Its surface writhed with movement that hurt to look at directly. The defense platforms opened fire. Plasma bolts that could vaporize a cruiser struck the vessel and passed through it as if it weren't there. The ship didn't return fire. It didn't need to. It simply descended toward the planet, ignoring everything the Valkyrie threw at it. Daho felt his heart rate increase, but it was the familiar adrenaline of combat, not the paralysis of terror. He had faced death before. This was just another enemy. The alarms began to sound throughout the palace. The Void Hunters had arrived. The palace descended into chaos faster than Daho would have thought possible. One moment, the guards stood at their posts, weapons ready. The next, reality itself seemed to twist. Dark shapes materialized in the corridors, phasing through walls and floors as if they were made of mist. Got his first clear look at a Void Hunter in the eastern corridor. It stood 3 meters tall, its body covered in segmented black carapace that seemed to absorb light. Multiple limbs ending in razor talons extended from its torso. Its head was eyeless, but swiveled toward the nearest Valkyrie guard with perfect precision. The creature's mouth opened, revealing row after row of crystalline teeth that glowed with a sickly purple light. The Valkyrie guard froze completely. His weapon dropped from nerveless fingers. His scales turned pure white with terror. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He simply stood there as the hunter approached, every instinct in his body screaming that death had arrived and resistance was impossible. Daiho didn't hesitate. He raised his plasma rifle and fired a controlled burst at the creature's center mass. The hunter shrieked, a sound that made the air vibrate painfully. It spun toward Daiho, surprised to find prey that fought back. The plasma had actually hurt it, scorching the carapace where normal weapons passed through harmlessly. "Move!" Daiho shouted at the frozen guard, but the Velkari couldn't respond. His mind had shut down completely in the face of genetic memory older than his civilization. The hunter lunged. Daiho rolled to the side, came up firing. The creature was fast, incredibly fast, but it moved in predictable patterns. Daiho had fought fast opponents before. He led his shots, aiming for joints and gaps in the armor. Another shriek confirmed he was doing damage, but now more hunters were appearing. They phased through walls on all sides, drawn by the sounds of combat and the psychic signature of terrified Velkari throughout the palace. Daiho had to fall back, leaving the paralyzed guard to his fate. He hated it, but staying meant dying uselessly. He ran toward the throne room. That's where Queen Myrae would be, and his duty was to protect her. The corridors were filled with chaos. Velkari guards stood frozen at their posts or ran blindly in panic. Civilians screamed and fled in random directions. The hunters moved through it all like sharks through water, selecting targets with casual precision. Daiho burst through the throne room doors and found Captain Tavrik standing motionless before the throne, his weapon hanging limply in his clawed hand. His scales had turned almost transparent with fear. 3 hunters had phased through the walls and were converging on Queen Myrae. The queen stood defiant, refusing to run, but Daiho could see her hands trembling. She was fighting the fear with everything she had, but biology was catching up with willpower. In seconds, she would be as paralyzed as her guards. Daiho didn't think. He acted. He charged forward, interposing himself between the queen and the nearest hunter. He opened fire at point-blank range, the plasma rifle kicking against his shoulder. The hunter recoiled, its carapace cracking under the sustained assault. "Your Majesty, we need to move now." He grabbed her arm, breaking through her fear-induced trance. Myrae blinked, her golden eyes focusing on the human. "My guards are gone. We're alone." He fired again, driving back the second hunter. The third circled, looking for an opening. "There's a service corridor behind the throne. Move." Training reasserted itself in the queen's mind. She ran for the hidden door, her long legs carrying her with surprising speed. Daiho backed after her, laying down covering fire. The hunters pursued, but cautiously now. This prey hurt them. This prey fought back. They fled through corridors that Daiho had memorized during his first weeks in the palace. Behind them, the sounds of death. Ruction echoed through the crystal walls. The hunters were tearing through the palace methodically, eliminating anything that moved. "Where are we going?" Myrae gasped as they ran. "The armory first. We need more ammunition. Then the emergency bunker, if it's still secure." They encountered more frozen guards, more fleeing civilians. Daiho tried to help where he could, shouting directions to safe zones and pushing weapons into hands that could still grip them. Most Velkari were too far gone in panic to listen, but a few managed to hold on to enough presence of mind to follow his orders. The armory was chaos. Weapons had been pulled from storage and abandoned when the guards fled. Daiho grabbed everything he could carry: power cells for the plasma rifle, grenades, a backup pistol. He found a combat knife and strapped it to his thigh. If the hunters got close enough for that, he was probably dead, but he'd go down swinging. "Can you shoot?" he asked the queen. Myrae stared at the rifle he offered her. I completed basic military training." But that was years ago, and I never point at the target, pull the trigger, try not to hit me. He thrust the weapon into her hands. It's not complicated. A hunter phased through the wall behind them. Deho spun and fired in one smooth motion. The creature shrieked and withdrew, but they could hear more approaching. The palace was crawling with them now. They ran again, this time toward the emergency bunker in the palace's lower levels. The bunker was designed to withstand orbital bombardment, sealed with blast doors 3 meters thick. If anywhere in the palace was safe, it would be there. The corridors down were full of Valkyrie, trying to reach the same destination. Daiho and Myray joined the flow of refugees, all pretense of royal dignity abandoned in the face of survival. Behind them, the hunters pursued, phasing through walls to cut off escape routes and separate groups from the main body of fleeing. Valkyrie, Lieutenant Bora appeared from a side corridor, herding a group of civilian staff. Her scales were pale with fear, but her weapon was in her hands, and she was still moving. Your Majesty. This way. They combined groups and pushed forward together. Bora kept looking back at the pursuing hunters, her training warring with her instincts. I can't. I should fight, but I can't make myself turn around. Don't think about it, Deho advised. Just keep moving. Get these people to safety. The bunker doors came into view ahead. They were already open, with Minister Ji-woo and a handful of guards ushering people inside. The elderly advisor's scales were gray with terror, but he was maintaining his composure through sheer force of will. Hurry. Everyone inside. Deho and Bora pushed their group forward. The Queen went through the doors, then turned back. Come on. Deho was the last through. As the doors began to seal, he caught a glimpse of the corridor behind them. Hunters filled the passage, their eyeless faces all turned toward the bunker. They had found the largest concentration of prey, and they weren't going to let it escape easily. The blast doors sealed with a heavy thud. Silence fell in the bunker, broken only by the gasping breaths of the survivors and the quiet sobs of those who had lost family members in the chaos. Deho counted heads. Maybe 30 Valkyrie had made it to the bunker, out of a palace staff of over 300. Queen Myray, Minister Ji-woo, Lieutenant Bora, and a handful of guards. The rest were civilians, technical staff, and servants. Captain Tavrek was not among them. What do we do now? Ji-woo asked, his voice shaking. Deho checked his ammunition. We wait and see if they can breach the doors. If they do, we fight. Fight? Ji-woo stared at the human. Did you not see what's out there? We can't fight those things. I can, Deho said simply. And I will. Queen Myray looked at the human soldier, this primitive from a backwater planet who stood ready to face nightmares, while her own elite guards had fled in terror. Why? She asked quietly. Why don't you freeze like we do? Deho shrugged. Maybe humans are too stupid to know when we're beaten. Or maybe we just never learned to quit. He checked his rifle's charge. Either way, I'm not running. Outside the bunker, the hunters began testing the doors. The bunker was designed as a command center during emergencies, with communication systems, emergency supplies, and sleeping quarters for extended stays. The problem was that it had never been designed to hold off an enemy that could phase through solid matter. Deho examined the walls carefully. They were reinforced duralloy, 3 meters thick with energy shields embedded in the structure. These shields, he asked Ji-woo, do they stop physical objects or energy weapons? Both, the minister replied. They create a barrier that nothing can penetrate. Can these hunters phase through them? Ji-woo's scales rippled with uncertainty. I don't know. The shields use different technology than simple walls. In theory, they should hold, but we're in completely new territory, Deho finished. He turned to Lieutenant Bora, who was the highest-ranking military officer present besides himself. "What's the status of forces outside the palace?" Bora checked a communication panel, her hands still shaking slightly. "Orbital defense platforms are still firing, but nothing they do has any effect. Ground forces are scattered. Most units have broken and run." She looked ashamed. "The fear is too strong. Even with training, even knowing we should stand and fight, we just can't." "Has anyone managed to fight back at all?" "Some," Ora admitted. "Individual soldiers who were far enough from the hunters that the psychic effect was weaker. They report that conventional weapons are useless, but plasma and energy weapons can damage the creatures. The problem is getting close enough to use them without being paralyzed." Deho nodded slowly. "So we can hurt them. We just need people who can overcome the fear long enough to shoot." "Only you can do that," Myray said quietly. She had been listening to the exchange, her tactical mind working despite her fear. "You're not affected like we are." "Why? Best guess?" "Humans don't have the same genetic memory as Velkari. These things didn't hunt my ancestors, so my brain doesn't recognize them as the ultimate predator. To me, they're just another enemy." He checked the bunker's armory. It was well stocked with weapons and ammunition. "That gives me an advantage, but it's not enough. One human against however many hunters are out there. I'll die eventually." "So we're trapped," Jiwoo said bitterly, "waiting for them to break through and slaughter us like animals." "Or," Queen Myray said slowly, her eyes on Doho, "we change the game." Everyone turned to look at her. The queen stood straighter, her scales shifting from pale fear white to a more determined silver gold. "The hunters use our fear against us. They've evolved to hunt Velkari specifically, to trigger our deepest survival instincts. But what if we could overcome that? What if we could fight anyway?" "Impossible," Jiwoo started, but Myray cut him off. "Is it? Look at Lieutenant Bora. She's afraid, terrified even, but she made it here while herding civilians to safety. That took courage. That took choice." The queen turned to the young officer. "How did you do it?" Bora's scales flushed with embarrassment. I don't know, Your Majesty. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to flee. But I thought about what the human would do." She glanced at Deho. "He's always so calm. Like fear is just something that happens but doesn't control you. I tried to copy that." "You succeeded," Deho said. "That's all that matters." Myray began pacing, her tactical mind racing. "Sergeant Daiho, in human military doctrine, how do you train soldiers to fight despite fear?" "Repetition, mostly. You put them in stressful situations over and over until the fear becomes familiar. It doesn't go away, but you learn to function through it." He paused. "You also give them something to fight for, a reason stronger than the fear." "What's your reason?" Bora asked. Deho shrugged. "It's my job. I signed up to protect others. That doesn't stop being true just because I'm scared." The queen made a decision. She activated the bunker's emergency broadcast system, which could reach any surviving Velkari forces across the planet. Her voice would be transmitted to every military installation, every bunker, every ship still in orbit. "This is Queen Myray," she began, and every Velkari in the bunker stood straighter at the sound of their monarch's voice. "I speak to you from the emergency bunker beneath the royal palace. I will not lie to you. The Void Hunters have returned. They are everything our ancestors feared. Many have died already. Many more will die before this is over." She paused, letting that sink in. "I speak to you now not as your queen, but as a fellow Velkari who stands paralyzed by the same fear that grips you all. My guards fled. My elite warriors, trained from birth, abandoned their posts because their bodies betrayed them. I do not condemn them for this. How can I, when I feel the same terror? Ji Woo started to object, but Mai Rei silenced him with a gesture. But I also stand beside a human soldier who does not share our weakness. Sergeant Daeho of Earth has no reason to fight for Velter Prime. This is not his world. We are not his people. Yet when my guards fled, he remained. When the hunters came, he fought. Not because he's unafraid, but because he chooses to stand regardless of fear. The broadcast reached across the planet. In scattered bunkers and hiding places, Valkyrie soldiers and civilians listened to their queen's words. Our species survived the hunters once before, not by defeating them, but by outlasting them. They left because we were no. Daeho understood, though. You're not easy prey anymore. They hunt civilizations that freeze in fear, that break and scatter. You fought back. You hurt them. That changes the calculation. Easier prey exists elsewhere. It was a grim victory. The palace was in ruins. The death toll across Velter Prime was catastrophic. Entire cities had been depopulated before the Valkyrie learned to overcome their fear. But they had learned. That was what mattered. Rescue ships began arriving as the sun rose over the battered capital. Medical teams, emergency supplies, reinforcements that came too late to help, but in time to rebuild. Queen Mai Rei refused medical treatment until every wounded soldier had been seen to first. She stood in the ruins of her throne room as dawn light filtered through the shattered crystal walls. Daeho stood beside her, his arm in a hastily applied sling. We need to change everything, Mai Rei said quietly. Our military doctrine, our training, our entire approach to defense. The Valkyrie have relied on technology and tactics for so long that we forgot what courage means. You'll rebuild, Daeho assured her. You're already stronger than you were yesterday, because a human taught us how to fight while afraid. She turned to look at him. My advisors will want to reward you. Medals, titles, land, wealth. What do you want? Daeho thought about it. Nothing, Your Majesty. I was just doing my job. That's not acceptable. You saved my life. You saved all of us. All right. Then I want your military to train with humans. Exchange programs, joint exercises, shared tactical development. We can learn from each other. Mai Rei smiled, showing her sharp teeth. Done. And you personally? What do you want for yourself? I'd like to stay on as your guard, if you'll have me. Someone needs to make sure you don't rely too much on technology next time. The Queen's smile widened. You're aware that most of my guards fled and left me to die? Most of them came back, Daeho pointed out. That counts for something. Besides, Captain Tavrek fought well once he got over his initial panic. He'll be insufferable about it, but he earned the right. As if summoned, Tavrek limped into the throne room. His scales were bandaged, and he moved like every muscle hurt, but his spine was straight. He saluted the Queen, then turned to Daeho. I owe you my honor, the captain said stiffly. When I fled, I was certain I could never return. Your example and the Queen's words brought me back. For that, I am in your debt. Daeho returned the salute. You brought 15 guards back into a fight against nightmare creatures. That took guts, Captain. Your honor is intact. Over the following weeks, Velter Prime began to heal. The Valkyrie military underwent massive reforms, incorporating human training methods and psychological preparation. Soldiers were taught that fear was natural, but didn't have to be controlling. They learned to fight through it, to choose courage over instinct. Queen Mai Rei addressed her people from the rebuilt throne room, with Sergeant Daeho standing at his post behind her, just as he had before the attack. The broadcast went out across the empire. The Void Hunters taught us a painful lesson. They showed us that our greatest weakness is not military or technological, but psychological. We evolved with fear as a survival tool, but we allowed that fear to become a weakness. Never again, she gestured to Deo. This human, from a species we once considered primitive, showed us what true strength means. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The Velkari Empire will adopt new training methods, new military doctrines, and a new understanding of courage. We will never be caught unprepared again. The reform spread throughout Velkari space. Human advisors were welcomed into their military academies. Joint training exercises became common. The two species learned from each other, combining Velkari tactical precision with human stubborn determination. And in the royal palace, Sergeant Deho continued his duties as the Queen's personal guard. The other guards no longer viewed him with condescension. They had seen him fight, seen him stand when they couldn't, and learned from his example. Late one evening, Queen Myre found Deho on the palace walls. Looking up at the stars, "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "Eventually. Predators don't give up hunting grounds permanently. But when they do, you'll be ready." "We'll be ready," she corrected. "You're Velkari now, Sergeant, whether you admit it or not." Deho smiled. "I'm human, Your Majesty. That won't change. But I'm honored to stand with you." They stood together in comfortable silence, human and Velkari, soldier and queen, looking up at the stars where ancient horrors lurked in the darkness between worlds. The Void Hunters were still out there, still hunting, still feeding on civilizations that froze in terror at their approach. But the Velkari Empire had learned a hard lesson, paid for in blood and fear and stubborn courage. They had learned that sometimes the best defense isn't superior technology or brilliant tactics. Sometimes it's just the simple human refusal to quit, the determination to stand and fight, even when every instinct screams to run, the choice to be brave despite the fear.